You know, for the longest time, the world had this unspoken rule that there was only one top spot, one throne, and one flag flying at the top of global power. For decades, that spot belonged to America. The movies, the media, the military, the money, everything seemed to orbit around the U.S. But something extraordinary happened, and it didn't happen overnight. It happened quietly, consistently, and unapologetically. India, a nation once underestimated, once written off as developing, has now stepped into the light. And the world is watching, jaws dropped, as India overtakes the United States. Not by chance, not by luck, but by sheer grit, discipline, and unstoppable belief in its own destiny. This isn't just about GDP numbers or trade figures. This is about a mindset shift. You see, for years, the West sold the world a story that leadership belongs only to them. They told the world that innovation, power, and global authority had a fixed address in Washington. But while they were busy writing headlines, India was writing history. While they debated policy, India was building. While they talked about the future, India was already becoming it. The first shock the world felt wasn't military or political. It was technological. When India's digital infrastructure suddenly scaled beyond anything the U.S. could imagine, that was the first tremor. Over 1 billion people connected through a unified digital ID, digital payments crossing records daily, and a financial system more inclusive than any Western model. America couldn't believe that a country once associated with call centers was now leading the charge in artificial intelligence, fintech, and digital governance. You talk about innovation. India built systems that Silicon Valley now studies. Then came the second wave manufacturing and self-reliance. While America was outsourcing, India was insourcing. Factories, startups, and industries started booming under policies that pushed for Make in India. And guess what? Global corporations, including American ones, started lining up to invest because they saw where the wind was blowing. From semiconductors to defense equipment, from electric vehicles to green hydrogen, India isn't just following trends, it's setting them. But the real shock wasn't in what India made. It was in what India refused the turning point no one noticed to buy. India stopped being a customer of the global order and started becoming a creator of it. It began saying no to deals that didn't serve its people. It began negotiating from strength, that desperation. That's when Washington realized this wasn't the India of 1991 begging for IMF bailouts. This was the India of 2025 dictating trade terms with confidence and clarity. Now let's talk about military power because that's where the Western world thought it could still dominate. But oh, did they get a wake-up call? The Indian armed forces transformed faster than anyone saw coming. Hypersonic weapons, homegrown fighter jets, advanced drones, nuclear submarines, and cutting-edge radar systems all built with Indian hands, Indian minds, and Indian spirit. The BrahMos missile, once co-developed, became an export sensation. Nations that used to buy from the U.S. began buying from India. America didn't see that coming. They had to watch in disbelief as their traditional market shifted east. And while all this was happening, something else was unfolding, something far more powerful than economics and weapons. India was earning respect, not demanding it. When disaster struck, Indian rescue teams were the first on the ground. When global crisis hit, Indian diplomacy brought calm where others spread chaos. While the U.S. used power to pressure nations, India used compassion to connect them. It wasn't about dominance, it was about dignity. Then came space, that final frontier where America thought it still had untouchable superiority. And yet when Chandrayaan landed on the moon's south pole, the entire world froze. That wasn't just a scientific achievement, it was symbolic. It said, we don't need permission to touch the stars. And it didn't stop there. India's space missions became more cost-efficient, more reliable, and more purpose-driven than those of much richer nations. The shock wasn't that India succeeded. It was that it did so at 1/10 the cost with the arrogance. And while all this progress was unfolding, India's youth, the heartbeat of this transformation, were rewriting the global playbook. Over 65% of the population under 35, millions of engineers, creators, and entrepreneurs turning ideas into revolutions. Silicon Valley, Wall Street, even NASA. How India flipped the economic script everywhere you looked. There were Indian minds at the core of global innovation. But now, instead of leaving, they were staying home building for India, not just from India. That's what scared the U.S. the most when the brain drain became a brain game. Let's not forget how the world used to talk about India. Overpopulated, they said. Polluted, they said. Poor, they said. Poor, they said. But today, that same population is its greatest power. The largest workforce, the biggest market, and the most vibrant democracy. Pollution India is leading in renewable energy poverty. It's been replaced with possibility, and that's why the world is shocked. Not because India grew, but because it grew on its own terms. For decades, America played the role of the world's big brother, offering loans, aid, and advice. But India didn't just take it learn. It learned how to rise through every setback how to rebuild after every crisis, and how to adapt when others panic. That's why when the global economy stumbled, India surged ahead. While others printed money to survive, India built industries to thrive. But make no mistake, overtake America isn't about competition. It's about correction. It's about restoring balance to a world that forgot the East once led civilization. Long before the United States existed, India was leading in mathematics, medicine, philosophy, and trade. The wheel has simply turned and the rhythm of destiny has returned. And what's even more surprising to the West is how India carries this power, not with aggression, not with dominance, but with grace. The American model has always been loud, global, performative. The Indian model is silent, grounded, unshakable. India doesn't shout its achievements. It lets the world talk about them. And the louder the world reacts, the calmer India becomes, because power that's real doesn't need to announce itself. It radiates quietly. When India overtook America in economic growth, the analysts called it temporary. When it overtook in population, they said unsustainable. But when it overtook in influence, suddenly the narrative changed, because influence is something you can't measure with data. You measure it with respect. And today, more nations respect India's voice in global forums than ever before. Whether it's G20 BRI or the UN, when India speaks, even superpowers listen. The fall of dependency on the West, you see, the world's shock doesn't come from India's rise. It comes from its refusal to fall. Every time history tried to push India down, it bounced back stronger. Colonialism couldn't break it. Partition couldn't stop it. Poverty couldn't define it. And now even global politics can't contain it. That's the kind of resilience America never saw coming, because they're used to power built on money. India's power is built on endurance, centuries of it. And this overtaking moment didn't come through war or dominance. It came through peace, persistence, and patience. India didn't invade anyone to grow. It built its strength brick by brick, idea by idea, person by person. It showed the world that you could be powerful without being feared, respected without being ruthless. Let's talk about the cultural shift that came with it. The West used to export its culture to shape others, but now India's culture is what's shaping global consciousness. Yoga, Ayurveda, Indian cinema, cuisine, spirituality, they've gone from being foreign trends to universal lifestyles. Even in the heart of America, people are quoting Indian philosophers, practicing Indian traditions, and learning Indian values. That's soft power at its finest. The kind that doesn't conquer land, but conquers hearts. So when the headlines say India overtakes the USA, they're not just talking about numbers. They're talking about narrative. The story the world once believed that only the West could lead is being rewritten. And this time it's written in Sanskrit, in Hindi, and Tamil, in the voices of 1 billion people who never gave up. And you know what makes this even more powerful? India didn't need to tear anyone down or rise. It didn't need to attack or undermine. It just focused inward on its people, its purpose, and its progress. The West kept asking, how did India do it? But the truth is simple. India did it by believing in itself when nobody else did. When the U.S. focused on political polarization, India focused on national vision. When the U.S. chased headlines, India chased milestones. When the U.S. exported wars, India exported wisdom. That's why the shift feels so shocking, because it's moral as much as it is material. And now America's biggest realization is this: you can't outshine a nation whose light comes from within. Oh, India doesn't just innovation born from struggle have a strong economy. It has a strong soul. And that's something no policy, no sanction, no alliance can replicate. Because when a nation finds alignment between its heritage and its hunger, between its past and its potential, it becomes unstoppable. There's a new kind of silence in global politics today. It's not the silence of fear. It's the silence of realization. The realization that India's time has come, that the balance of power has shifted, and that the next century belongs to those who build, not boast. America built its empire on visibility. India is building its legacy on vision. You can almost feel it. The world's standing still wondering how this happened. How did a nation once written off as chaotic, complex, and poor rise to become the pulse of the planet? The answer lies in something the West still doesn't fully understand. Unity and diversity. In India, every language, every religion, every culture, every festival teaches resilience. The ability to hold contradictions and still move forward, that's India's secret weapon. That's what no superpower can copy. And while the world debates who's number one, India isn't even in that race anymore. Because true leadership isn't about being above others. It's about lifting others. You look at Africa, Southeast Asia, the Middle East. Nations that once looked to the U.S. are now partnering with India, not out of fear, but out of trust. That's how global order changes. Not with explosions, but with evolution. India overtaking America isn't the end of an era. It's the beginning of balance. It's the return of wisdom, all power, compassion, led leadership, and purpose-led growth. And the beauty of it all, India isn't asking for applause. It's not demanding recognition. It's simply walking its path. Head high, feet grounded, vision clear. So when you hear people say the world is shocked, remember shock only happens when you've been sleeping. The world was asleep while India was awake. The world was talking while India was working. The world was doubting while India was believing. And now the results are undeniable. India didn't just overtake the USA, it overtook fear. It overtook dependency, it overtook doubt. And it reminded the entire planet that greatness doesn't come from who starts the race first. It comes from who never stops running. The loudest power isn't the one with the microphone. It's the one the world listens to in silence. The loudest power, India's defense power that silence critics, isn't the one that commands attention. It's the one the world follows in silence. When you look at the world today, it's easy to get fooled by noise. You see countries boasting about military drills, leaders making bold statements, media headlines flashing dominance and threats. It's all performance, all presentation, but real power. It doesn't perform. It moves quietly. It doesn't have to scream because it already knows the world is listening. And that's what India has become. The power of the world follows in silence. For decades, people measured power by how loud a nation could be, how many bases it had, how big its weapons were, how strongly it could intimidate others. America mastered that. It had its hand in every region, every alliance, every economy. The U.S. was the voice everyone had to hear, even when they didn't want to. But somewhere along the way, that loudness became noise. And in the noise, truth got lost. While the West argued about who controlled the world, India quietly built one of its own. One that didn't need validation, one that didn't need permission, and one that didn't need applause. India never had to announce its power because it was too busy earning it. You don't have to tell the world you're powerful when your work speaks louder than your words. Every new satellite, every innovation, every global partnership, each became a whisper that echoed louder than the speeches of any Western leader. That's what makes true power unsettling. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with consistency. And that consistency is what made India unstoppable. When a nation walks in silence, people underestimate it. They mistake calm for weakness. But the moment that nation decides to reveal its strength, it doesn't shout. It simply acts. Look at how India handled the global crisis of recent years. While others panicked, India supplied vaccines to over 100 countries. No boasting, no banners, no parades, just quiet compassion and capability. And that single act changed how the world saw power. Because real leadership doesn't seek attention, it seeks impact. The same principle applies to how India manages its diplomacy. The United States has always led with loudness, threats, sanctions, warnings. India leads with understanding, balance, and patience. When global conflicts rise, India becomes the steady hand. It doesn't take sides just to please others. It takes a stand that makes America's unexpected realization sense for humanity. That's why nations from the East and West both listen when India speaks, because there's something magnetic about restraint, something divine about strength that doesn't need validation. Now, power is a strange thing. When it's loud, it demands to be noticed. When it's silent, it demands to be respected. And that's where India's power lies. It's not in making noise, but in making moves. From leading in space exploration to revolutionizing digital infrastructure, India has been setting standards without shouting about them. That's why the world follows. They're not following the noise. They're following the results. Think about the concept of power that comes from silence. Nature works the same way. The sun doesn't make noise, but everything grows because of it. The ocean doesn't shout, yet it covers most of the earth. The wind doesn't boast, yet it shapes the mountains over time. India's power feels like that. Steady, unseen at first glance, but shaping the world in ways that cannot be ignored. When people used to talk about global influence, they mentioned only a few capitals: Washington, London, Beijing. Now you hear New Delhi in that same conversation. But the difference is India didn't force its way into the room. It was invited because the world realized that this is a nation whose silence carries weight. When India speaks in global summits, it doesn't try to dominate the floor. It speaks with clarity, and everyone listens because that voice has truth behind it. The loud powers of the world often confuse dominance with leadership. They believe shouting louder makes them more right. But India's rise proves something else entirely. That quiet power is sustainable power. The U.S. has dared to spend trillions to maintain its global control, building alliances and waging wars. India has spent decades building relationships through trade, culture, and compassion. One is built on fear, the other on respect. And in the long run, respect always outlasts fear. You see, people remember how you make them feel, not how loudly you speak. The world remembers India not for threats, but for healing, not for invasions, but for inspiration. Global influence. India's silent diplomacy. And that's why even in silence, India's name travels far. Every Indian innovation, every humanitarian act, every quiet step toward progress, it echoes across continents. And that's when you realize that silence isn't the absence of power. Silence is power under control. The thing about silent power is that it's not emotional, it's intentional. It doesn't react, it responds. And when it responds, the whole world feels the vibration. Take, for instance, how India manages global politics today. When big powers clash, India doesn't rush to take sides. It waits, it watches, it waits. And then when it moves, the move shifts the balance entirely. That's strategy, not noise. That's wisdom, not pride. There's something deeply cultural about this, too. Indian philosophy has always taught the value of inner strength, that the loudest drum makes the weakest sound. True wisdom, true mastery is always quiet. The great leaders of Indian history, from Ashoka to Gandhi, understood that power without humility becomes poison. So they chose influence through example, not intimidation. That same philosophy flows through modern India. The world sees it and doesn't quite know how to react because they're used to leaders who scream. India simply acts. In the global economy, that same pattern repeats. When the U.S. economy struggles, its markets shake, its headlines explode, its politicians panic. But when India faces challenges, it adapts. It doesn't broadcast its problems, it fixes them. And the quiet rebuilding that follows becomes more powerful than any speech. When you keep working in silence, your results make the noise for you. India's silent strength also comes from something deeper. Unity and diversity. A nation that speaks hundreds of languages, follows many religions, and yet moves forward as one. That's a kind of power the world can't understand because it's not enforced, it's embraced, And when that many voices learn to coexist without silencing each other, they create harmony. And harmony by nature doesn't shout, it resonates. What makes the world follow India in silence is also trust. All nations know India isn't trying to manipulate them. They know its intentions are transparent. They know its strength doesn't come from control, but from character. In a world where so many powers use force to get obedience, India earns respect by showing patience. That's why countries across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East are turning to India for partnerships instead of Western powers because they're tired of loud promises that fade. They want quiet reliability that delivers. Even in defense, India's approach is the embodiment of silent power. The nation builds one of the most advanced military forces in the world, yet never uses it for aggression. Its strength lies in deterrence, not dominance. You don't have to flex when everyone knows you can. That's why Indian defense advancements, missiles, submarines, drones shake the world without a single threat being lessons from India's unstoppable journey spoken. Because silence backed by capability is the most intimidating sound of all. And think about this. Silence creates curiosity. The moment you stop explaining yourself, people start wondering what you're planning. That's what makes India's rise so intriguing. It doesn't brag, it doesn't overpromise, and yet it keeps achieving. The world keeps guessing what India will do next, how it will move, what its next step will be. That mystery is part of its magnetism. India's silent rise also teaches something powerful about leadership itself. The greatest leaders in history were not the ones who shouted orders. They were the ones who inspired others to act without being told. The world today is following India, not because it demands attention, but because it earns admiration. When 1 billion people move with purpose, the world cannot ignore that rhythm, even if it makes no sound. The U.S. used to believe that microphones, media, and money define power. But India is showing that influence now flows through different channels: culture, technology, and trust. A movie, a festival, a meditation technique, a digital payment app, these may look small individually, but together they're reshaping how the world lives. You can silence a speech, but you can't silence a spirit. And India's spirit has reached every corner of the globe without a single demand. You see, true power doesn't ask for attention, it attracts it. When you're too focused on doing the work, the results become your advertisement. And that's exactly how India operates. While the loud nations keep broadcasting their greatness, India keeps building greatness. Every successful space mission, every startup crossing global boundaries, every humanitarian gesture, all of it adds up to a symphony of silent success. Even when it comes to culture, India's quiet influence is everywhere. You walk into homes across America, Europe, and Asia. You'll find yoga mats, turmeric lights, Bollywood playlists, Sanskrit, tattoos, meditation apps. None of this came with propaganda. It came with authenticity. The world followed because it felt something real, and that's what silent power does. It inspires imitation. Not through pressure, but through admiration. India's silence isn't emptiness, it's depth. When a nation knows who it is, it doesn't need to prove anything. The West keeps searching for identity through the power that moves in silence power. India found identity through peace, and that peace radiates outward, making even the loudest nations pause and listen. Because deep down every country, every leader, every individual, they crave what India represents: balance, wisdom, and calm confidence. Power that commands attention burns out. Power that moves in silence lasts generations. The U.S. rose fast, burned bright, and now struggles to sustain its flame. India's rise is different. It's steady, grounded, spiritual. It's like the dawn. You don't hear it coming, but when it arrives, darkness disappears. That's why the world follows in silence, because they know something greater is unfolding, and they don't want to interrupt it. And if you look closely, you'll notice how silence always wins in the end. Empires that were built on noise eventually crumble under their own echo. But civilizations that grow through silence endure. India isn't trying to outshine others. It's simply rising in its own light. And in that light, the world is finding direction. Because sometimes the quietest presence commands the loudest respect. The loudest power isn't the one that commands attention. It's the one the world follows in silence.